What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the June 2020 format. Things are still a little bit weird, right? I mean, real life Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't yet resumed because we're still technically under quarantine. We're not really gonna have much Yu-Gi-Oh going on in the physical space aside from some locals that are slowly starting to open up. And even though we just got the June 2020 ban list, it definitely left a lot to be desired, right? Now, this is obvious. Like, all the products that have come out leading up to this point haven't had a chance to see physical play. So the chances that Konami was going to do anything to this list was very minimal, and albeit they did bring some cards off the list, there could have been a lot more that they could have done, and that doesn't mean we necessarily have to be happy about it. So we're going to be in a very similar format to how we were before, but I still want to make sure you guys are equipped with the knowledge to know what decks are the best going into this format in case you decide to compete in any online tournaments. Now, I will say, if you're looking for a different type of experience, over at the Pro Play Tour, we have executed and enforced our own ban list, just making some slight modifications to the June 2020 ban list. This is only going to be a temporary list for online play for the next month or so, but it's cool to kind of experiment and see what the format would be like if some of these changes were made had it not been for the quarantine. So links are down in the description. Joseph Rothschild, MBT Yu-Gi-Oh, and I will be commentating that event, and I really hope to see you guys there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off with number 5, we have a deck that is just on the verge of greatness and still manages to get those top cut appearances, but just kind of falls short in some regards, but still a very devastating threat nonetheless, and that is Dinosaur. One of the reasons why I have Dinosaur on this list is purely based on the fact that Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is a card. When you look at the rest of the format and how Ultimate Conductor Tyranno positions itself, it's one of the few cards that can actually go toe-to-toe with the top decks and actually deal with some of the devastating boards that these decks are able to amass. Obviously, Dinosaur has a lot of other good things going for it as well. If you're going first, playing a True King variant, you're able to go into True King of all Calamities pretty easily, I might add, and that card is basically an auto win going first because that card wasn't hit on the ban list either. This card is just ripe for abuse, and as long as it remains legal, you guys should definitely be taking advantage of it. Dinosaur has a pretty decent amount of consistency. You've got so many powerful cards. You can even play a going first or going second build depending on whatever the meta kind of changes to, and that's where you can really see the deck shine because it is able to throw in all those going second cards and capitalize in a going second environment. For all these reasons I just mentioned, Dinosaur is looking to be a true threat in the format, and that's why I gave it my number 5 slot. But coming in at number 4, we have a deck that is a personal favorite of mine and is actually seeing a relatively high amount of success, actually winning some tournaments of the past formats, and that is Salamangreat. Yeah, Salamangreat's kind of like the good all-around choice at the moment. It kind of has the tools to deal with any deck and can especially take on Rogue very well while still being able to go toe-to-toe with the top tier contenders. Now, one thing about Salamangreat is that it did get boosted from Eternity Code thanks to the release of Parallel Exceed. This card is incredible because not only does it give you additional rank 4 options, with the rank 4 pool being so powerful with cards like Baguska, Abyss Dweller, some decks are even playing cards like Dugaris in addition to it, but we also have the fact that those cards can basically represent free link fodder in addition to that. The deck has also been built in thanks to Access Code Talker, having a 1-card Access Code Talker OTK thanks to a card like Update Jammer, which the deck already played anyway. Transcode Talker OTK was the name of the game prior to this, but Access Code is just pretty much better in every single way. It gives the deck a lot more offensive capability, and one of the big weaknesses of Salamangreat was closing that damage threshold and being able to close out those games, but now Salamangreat can do it all. One of the other strengths this deck has is that it can play a lot of hand traps, which if you're not playing some of the top decks of the format, you need those hand traps to kind of slow the other decks down, and Salamangreat is one of the grindiest decks of the format. It's got great control capabilities, it's got the ability to combo off when it needs to, and now that it has OTK potential, this deck is a real threat in the format. So for those reasons, that's why I gave Salamangreat my number 4 spot. Now coming in at number 3, we have a deck that is very similar to Salamangreat, but has just been outperforming it ever so slightly in terms of tournament results, and that is Sky Striker. Yes, Sky Striker first debuted in this format last month with Ryan Yu taking first place in the Luxury Championship Series event. It had about 300 or so-ish players. Some of the best players in the game were competing, and Sky Striker ended up taking the victory. Ever since then, a handful of players have just been jumping on this bandwagon, trying to develop Sky Striker even further to combat this current format, and this is something we really didn't see much of before. Some people were considering this like a niche budget option prior to this victory, but now here we go, Sky Striker being a very true threat in the format. One of the advantages that Sky Striker has has that's similar to Salamangreat is that you can play a lot of hand traps. Like I said, when you're going into this format and you're going up against the other top 2 decks, which we'll discuss in a moment, if you're not able to kind of just combo off and build an unbreakable board, you need to be able to stop these decks from doing what they're able to do by playing a ton of hand traps, and Ryan Yu's deck does exactly that. So that's already a check off the box there. But another strength that Sky Striker has is the fact that it plays a ton of spell cards, and a lot of its power relies in those spell effects. And since some of these decks in particular put up a lot of monster effect negations and not many spell negations, you are able to then capitalize, bait out a negation rather easily, and do everything that the engine needs to do in the spell half of your deck, while then being able to kind of just dismantle boards piece by piece, set up your own engine with cards like multi-roll, even though it is in fact limited, and then you have cards like Widow Anchor for defense, Afterburner for picking apart boards, Shark Cannon for easy link climbing, and another similar like to Salamangreat, you can access Code Talker so easily with this deck now. And again, this was one of the big issues with Sky Striker in the past, is that it had issues closing out games. We've seen in the past Sky Striker play cards like Borosword Dragon to close out games, also Utopia Double, and now Access Code Talker is the newest and probably the best way for this deck to do so, because since you also have all the different attributes of Sky Striker monsters, you can just get infinite amount of pops off of that Access Code Talker and have yourself a really good time. This deck is so good right now, and a lot of people are really flocking to it as kind of like, if you're not playing the top 2 decks, this is the deck of choice. Obviously, there's a lot of other decks people are experimenting with as well, but I don't think a deck has seen as much success from this point forward as Sky Striker, and so for those reasons, that's why I gave Sky Striker my number 3 spot. Now, before we continue on, I want to discuss the absolute power discrepancy between the top 2 decks, as well as every deck we've discussed on this list, as well as every other deck in the format, because there are 2 decks in particular that are just absolutely not only dominating the top cuts, but also the representation of online tournaments. And so when you're looking to compete in this format in particular, if you are not playing one of these 2 decks, you need to be looking to beat both of these decks, because these decks are everywhere, and both of these decks are in a classification of their own versus the rest of the decks altogether. It's an absolute miracle to see some of these other decks being able to just claim victory in a format like this, but when you see these decks having to main deck in the neighborhood of like 14-ish hand traps just to be able to compete, you obviously know there is an issue. So either one of these decks we're going to be discussing could be the number 1 pick, and you're really going to have to get nitpicky to kind of choose one over the other. So I just want to say that either one of these could be number 1, but for my number 2 pick, I actually went with Adamancipator. Now, the reason for this is because I felt like the other deck, in terms of overall representation, is seeing more play than Adamancipator, but both of these decks are extraordinarily powerful in their own right, and you have to take them seriously if you are competing in any sort of online environment. So, Adamancipator, there really isn't much to say here. This deck is just the absolute beast of a combo deck of the format. It is able to play through multiple disruptions. It is able to assemble boards that are nigh unbreakable in pretty much almost every instance. When you look at a board that has Abyss Dweller, IP Masquerena with a Block Dragon, and you have like Borreload Savage Dragon equipped with a Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, locking your opponent out of the extra deck, and also having like an Appaloosa with like 2 to 4 negations, like no deck is beating that. I'm sorry. When it gets to the point where even Dark Ruler No More doesn't do enough, you know that this deck is a problem. And so having to main deck just absolutely infinite numbers of hand traps just so you can stop the deck from getting to this point is pretty much one of the best ways you can go about beating it. But even then, it sometimes isn't enough, and you can't reliably always open those hand traps, which is why Adamancipator sees so much success. Even if their board does get broken, with the amount of resources you have to commit to break that board, you might not even be able to OTK them, and thanks to Block Dragon being a card in that deck, they're able to just regenerate all the resources that they use, because Block Dragon, when it leaves the field, just gets 3 more cards in most instances. Then they're able to do it again on the following turn. It is just one of the most powerful combo decks ever created. Definitely a deck that I personally feel like should have been addressed on the most recent ban list, but this deck can pretty much take you anywhere you want it to. Again, it does everything a combo player would love, and so for those reasons, that's why I have Adamantipator as my number 2 slot. But that's gonna bring us to my number 1 meta deck of the June 2020 format. And if you haven't already figured it out, I'm going with Eldritch. Synchro Eldritch, of course. Yeah, you could play some different variants of Eldritch. Invoked Eldritch, as a matter of fact, has actually seen a relative amount of success because versus Synchro Eldritch, you can actually play more hand traps to help combat some of these other decks, like Synchro Eldritch, since you don't have to commit your deck to the combo portion of the deck. But nonetheless, Synchro Eldritch is the route that most players are taking because this deck has some of the highest impact in the game all around. Now, I will say that compared to like Adamantipator, Synchro Eldritch is a little bit more fragile in the fact that you only need sometimes one hand trap to stop the deck, depending on what other extenders they have, because since they do have the control half of the deck being the Eldritch cards, those cards don't really do a lot in some instances. But conversely, even if you do get stopped, you have to contend with all the Eldritch cards, so it's like you have to deal with one of the grindiest decks in the game if the combo doesn't resolve, and then if you don't kill them on the following turn, which to be fair, it's Eldritch, so that can be difficult at times, because Halifibrax isn't limited to it at the very least, you're then able to do the combo again, because since Eldritch doesn't really care about the extra deck, you're able to put in multiple Halifibrax combos in your extra deck, so if the first one fails, you can try again on the next turn and do the whole thing all over again. One Jet Synchron by itself can represent, you know, either multiple negations, it can represent drawing like 4 to 5 cards, or it can represent a true King of all calamities plus drawing some cards in addition to that, and then having all the other Eldritch cards plus everything that lone Jet Synchron did. Like, the deck is just absurd, and not to mention side decking for this deck is so difficult because it's like a half combo, half control deck, so you have to either decide to side for like one half or the other. You could side for both, but in some instances, there hasn't really been a deck that's like this before, where if one half of it fails, it can just lean on the other half and still do perfectly well. Just the combination of these cards is so potent, so powerful, and that's why I put this deck at my number 1 meta deck of June 2020. This deck is not going anywhere anytime soon, and you can expect to see this deck all over the online environment if you decide to play. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.